Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of From Mess to Mindful, Healing How We Eat. In this podcast, we will explore food, body image, and self-compassion in digestible conversations. My name is Camille Pino, and I am so grateful that you're here. This podcast is a space for us to explore our relationship with food, our bodies, and ourselves. Here, we are reversing the ideas pushed onto us by diet culture and society. We're going to work together to unravel this tangled mess that these influences created. We do this not through the lens of rules or diets, but through curiosity, self compassion, mindfulness, and a commitment to all aspects of our wellness. Not just our physical wellness, but our mental and emotional wellness as well. I'm Camille Pino. I am a professional nutritionist and health coach. I have years of experience working in clinical nutrition, and I am pursuing my license to become a registered dietitian. As a health and wellness coach with a bachelor's degree in nutrition and a master's in kinesiology and integrative wellness, I'm passionate about helping people reconnect with their innate body wisdom and with their sense of self. I believe that food is not just fuel, it's the language of our culture. It's a tool for connection, and it's a source of comfort and pleasure. Eating food is and should be a pleasurable experience, yet for many of us, our relationship with food has become complicated, even painful. My mission is to help you reclaim your power and build a kinder, more trusting relationship with yourself, your body, and the food that you eat. Today's episode is called First Food Memories. I chose this title because those early experiences with food are so foundational for all of us. We'll be exploring how our early experiences with food and eating habits shape our core beliefs about eating, about our bodies, and even our identity. We'll be discussing how food acts as a relationship. Much like we have a relationship with people, we have a relationship with food. We will discuss how family and media culture influence the stories that we tell ourselves, about our bodies, and about food. We'll also talk about the subtle ways that we lose touch with our hunger and fullness cues throughout our lives, and how early experiences with food can lead to shame, guilt, and weight bias that we might not even be aware of, and how these can lead to disordered eating patterns. And I am so fortunate to not be on this journey alone. Today, I'm joined by two amazing people who are also my colleagues and friends. These women are so incredibly passionate about this work and, like you and me, have experienced the harmful effects of diet culture. So, without further delay, I'll get right to it. I'm thrilled to introduce my dear friends and colleagues, Yesenia and Iveth. Yesenia is a nutritionist with her bachelor's in food nutrition. She has years of experience working in clinical nutrition at Scripps Health Hospital, has volunteered her time in public health research and serving her community. She's going to start her grad school program next year, pursuing her master's in public health and nutrition, and she is also on her way to becoming a registered dietitian. Fun fact about Yesenia, in her free time, she likes to sew. Yesenia, go ahead and say hello.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here and thank you, Camille, for having me.
Yay, we're glad to have you here. Also join with us, Iveth is a degreed nutritionist with many years of experience working for the Family Health Centers of San Diego and Scripps Health Hospital in nutrition counseling and education. She is currently pursuing her master's in nutrition and dietetics and is also on her way to becoming a registered dietitian. Fun fact about Yvette, she loves to bake dessert recipes with a healthy twist, like cheesecake. Yvette, say hello to our audience.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here, Camille.
Thank you both for being here. I want to acknowledge that it's so powerful to have this conversation with you, as I know you both care so deeply about this topic. The title of this episode is First Food Memories. I named it accordingly because it's the first episode, and I wanted to show how our early memories of our lives really set the foundation of our eating habits and the relationship with food that we have in adulthood. Like I said, eating should be an enjoyable and pleasurable experience instead of one filled with emotions of anxiety, frustration, guilt, and shame that so many of us experience. Often, when we think about healthy eating, we fail to remember that it's an emotional and mental experience as well. The word healthy means something different for everybody, right? Some people imagine a green salad, some a nutrition supplement, Others, cutting out certain foods. And, so many of these ideas appear in the media we consume and in our family as well. And we're going to talk about these ideas later in the episode. For now, I want to dive into a very meaningful chat about diet culture. And before I do that, actually, let me rewind a bit. I want to shed some light on some f pleasurable food moments to remind us of how healthy eating should look. I'll go ahead and start us off. I remember when I was very young, maybe like 6 or 7, I was picky eater, but there was a few choice meals I would never turn down. One of them was arroz con huevo or Mexican rice and egg. And for those of you who don't know, Mexican rice is our version of rice. It's usually toasted in oil before being cooked in broth and tomato paste and other seasonings. And it's such a staple in my house growing up. It was served as a side dish often, but when you pair it with eggs, it can just be like a meal in itself. So I remember coming home every day. My brother would pick me up at, 2:15, take me home. 2:30, there would be sitting there right there on the table, my, Mexican rice and eggs. My mom would always have it ready for me when I got home from school. And I really like my eggs over easy. I would pop the yolk and like spread it all over into the eggs, and that's just how I like to eat my arroz con huevo. And for this period of time, I would eat it every day, like for months until I eventually got sick of it and I had to take a break from eating it altogether. I think that too much of a good thing can like be that, just too much. So thanks for listening to one of my core memories. I wanted to hand you both the floor to share a core memory of yours as well. Yvette, we can start with you. What's a vivid first food memory for you?
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my mom would like serve me the day of soup. And for those who may not know what that is, it's like a Mexican noodle soup made with tomato broth, chicken flavor seasoning, and noodles. My mom would toast like the noodles in oil to provide like a unique flavor. And she would sometimes switch up the noodle types too with like angel hair or bow tie or letters and serve the bowls or serve the soups in like special kid bowls. And I remember they were so fun to eat because they were in different shapes and things like that. And it just made me realize that these little touches with our meals created such a positive experience for me that even as a kid, I still remember to this day.
That is a beautiful memory. Thanks for sharing, Yvette. I love those little touches, like the different noodle shapes or your little special kid bowls. It made it more meaningful for you. Yesenia, what about you? What is a food memory that stands out?
For me, it was making tamales with my grandma and my tias. Sometimes I don't even make it, I would just watch them. But I would just I'd love to watch them and like sneak a little bite of the masa just because I knew I couldn't have it. And also, I was getting in trouble, but it was always fun to see them do that. So yeah.
I love that memory, Yesenia. What stands out to me is not just about the tamales themselves, but about the togetherness and the meaning wrapped up in the process of making them. It's so clear from both your stories that food is more than just what we eat, right? It holds life, it holds memory. For me, it has that whole memory around it of my late brother who would pick me up from school, take me home. And so the food facilitates that larger, more beautiful memory that surrounds it. And it's clear for both of your stories, food is also tied to family. It's tied to culture, to our earliest senses of belonging. But for so many of us, that relationship changes. It becomes complicated, confusing, sometimes even painful. Today, we're gathered to talk about how and why that happens. And more importantly, how we can begin to change and heal. So, we're going to dig into some of the themes we've already touched on. We've all felt it, the shift from food being a source of nourishment to being a source of stress, anxiety, and guilt and shame. It's more common than you think. Research has shown that 69 to 84% of women report body dissatisfaction, which is a major risk factor for disordered eating behaviors. I want to explore with you both the role that media, family systems, and other outside influences play in creating an unhealthy relationship with food and eating. Now, I do ask you to be vulnerable in this moment, so please share as little or as much as you wish to share. Thank you for being on this podcast with me. Did either of you receive messages, either directly or indirectly, about good foods versus bad foods, or about your body even? Yesenia?
Yeah, that's a really great place to start, by the way. I know for me growing up, it was a lot about good and bad foods. And I remember hearing that soda and sweets were bad and they'd make you hyper, while vegetables were good and were going to make you strong. And so even something as normal as tortillas, which were a staple in my house, they'd get labeled as bad if someone was indulging too much, it was seen as unhealthy. So it kind of just felt like a constant negotiation in my childhood between what I was told to eat and what I should eat and what I really wanted to eat. And so naturally, I'd feel pretty guilty anytime I strayed from these expectations. An example is like when my dad would pick me up on the weekends, I would be eating McDonald's Jack in the Box. My mom no would never let me have that. But another thing too is the most powerful messages I feel like weren't always about food directly, more so how the adults were speaking about their own bodies. So they'd say that they had to be good after a big holiday meal, like the tamales, or that they couldn't indulge because they were watching their weight. So those comments just kind of planted this idea that food had moral value and that my body was something that I needed to be monitoring and controlling.
Yesenia, that resonates so much. I remember for me at family reunions, relatives would comment on people's bodies, like saying someone looked too big or too small. And then those comments would come my way, like, have you gained weight? Have you lost weight? Even are you pregnant? When I started to gain weight in my 20s. And it made me so self-conscious. And for what? We're supposed to change. Our bodies are supposed to change. And those messages can plant seeds of shame and guilt that grow into something much bigger. When we start to believe that certain foods are morally wrong or that, our bodies need to be controlled, it creates a powerful sense of pressure. When we don't meet those unspoken expectations, we start to internalize feelings of failure. Where is the shame and guilt really coming from? It comes from these places and then they take root. Um, Thank you for sharing. Yvette, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of your experience with these kinds of pressures.
Yeah, first of all, that was a very strong message right there, Camille. That I couldn't agree more with that. For me and my family, like there was a different pressure about not being wasteful in the house. Like my parents made sure that we were well fed, and my mom would cook like a ton of food because a packed fridge meant like a sign of security because no one would go hungry. And because of that, we had this expectation to finish the plates on our excuse me, finish the foods on our plates, eat every last bit of the food. And sometimes when we couldn't finish it, we would feel so bad about it, especially knowing how much groceries cost. So sometimes we would pass over leftovers like to my dad, and he'd become like the unofficial plate cleaner just to help us out. So for me, it was more like the constant negotiation between like listening to my body and avoiding that guilt of wasting food.
I can relate to that story immensely. I remember my dad telling me there are people with less than us in the world, so it's better, to never waste food. So for me, that same fear of wasting food created this unspoken pressure to always finish what was on my plate. I was eating past my fullness cues, so in turn, my body signals became, well, irrelevant because I felt that I always had to finish my plate. Yesenia, can you speak from your experience and your studies, on hunger and fullness cues? Like, what does that make you think of?
Let me see. I love that question. Um, Honestly, for me, it just makes me remember about the time, like, well, the many times my mom would make me just like sit at the table and finish my plate. I'd be sitting there for like 30 minutes after everyone had gotten up, and I'd just be pushing food around until it was gone. So over time, I was learning to tune out my body's signals. And so now as an adult, even when I know like, okay, my body's full, like you're good, stop eating, there's still this little voice that says like you should keep going. So it's like that early conditioning never really left.
Yeah, it's not just our family and home life that shapes how we think about food and our bodies. Like it's what you said also remind me of the larger world around us too. Like one of the biggest influences is the media because like, where do you think our parents like got these ideas, right? To probably from their parents, but then also the media too, you know? Thank you for sharing that. That kind of leads me to my next topic. We've all seen it. Magazine covers promising the fastest way to lose 10 pounds, TV shows where the main characters almost always have thin, toned bodies, and commercials telling us to uh, use this new product or eat this food to melt fat or slim your waist. And research shows that repeated exposure to these narrow body ideals actually change the way we see ourselves. The American Psychological Association has found that constant exposure is strongly linked to body dissatisfaction, disordered eating, and a higher rate of unhealthy weight control behaviors, especially in young women. And this pressure often shows up in our behaviors as adults. In fact, studies suggest that 20 to 55% of women experience weight cycling, which is when you lose and regain weight repeatedly through restrictive diets. On the outside, dieting may look, discipline, like discipline. I mean, people are like, "Oh, you're so disciplined," right? But, inside, it's actually creating this storm of shame and guilt and a relentless pressure to measure our worth against our bodies, which like leads to this weight cycling. And it's like a vicious cycle because like you're weight cycling because you want results, you get results, and then maybe you fall back to binge eating because you restricted yourself so much on all the foods that you love. So now you're binge eating. Oh, you gain the weight back. What's next? We're gonna go on a diet. I saw some of my family members go through this treacherous cycle over and over and over again for years. And it was always the same cycle. Oh, you lost weight. You look great. And then they'd gain it back and then weight cycle again, lose the weight again. Oh, you look great. Thank you for listening to my little tangent. And then with social media, instead of seeing these messages once in a while, we're scrolling through them all day, right? Comparing ourselves not just to our celebrities, but to the influencers and even peers, many of which filter and edit their photos. So, they're not even reality. And it plants the idea that our worth depends on how closely we match these impossible beauty standards. So, on this topic, I wanted to ask you guys of your insight and maybe your experience with this topic. Yvette, I invite you. Would you please go first?
Yeah, of course. The media does play a huge impact on how we see our bodies. Like everywhere you look, like you mentioned, there are magazines, shows, people doing certain diets, workouts, basically anything to get skinnier because we've been taught that a thin body is much more sexier or valuable than a larger one. Unfortunately, I bought into that when I was like around 18 or 19, where I'd restrict my food portions and stopped eating after a certain time, even if I was starving at night. I remember scrolling through social media late at night, just looking at pictures of food that I wouldn't allow myself to have. On top of that, I was over exercising to burn off every calorie I ate. Like you said, people like friends, family would tell me I looked better, but they didn't see the mental battle I had going on in my head. Even when I was thin, I was still obsessed with like the little tiny body fat I had. So I was constantly thinking about food, but I forced myself to be disciplined so I could get this so-called dream body.
Thank you for being so vulnerable, Yvette. I can relate to that story so much. It moves me and it pains me to hear that, you had this internal storm of emotions going on and you couldn't even you like there was no opportunity to identify or feel those emotions because the feedback that you were getting was that you looked great. Um, so it's like, okay, but I don't feel great. But there's no time to acknowledge that's going on because you're meeting the beauty standard, right? And everybody's acknowledging that. So, like that gap between how others see us and how we feel inside is just so painful. And, this sparked something in me. I had a similar experience of restrictive eating in high school. I would go on these at-length juice cleanses because I was obsessed with being skinny, as if I wasn't already skinny enough. And then later on in college during COVID, I was gaining weight because it was, COVID, it was stressful. And, what do you go to for comfort? I went to fast food. And then, I'd gain this weight. And so then I would restrict and go on like these fasts. And then I would just like binge again and then restrict and then binge. And it wasn't until learning about these behaviors that we're acknowledging right now in our own medical nutrition therapy class in undergrad that I realized that, what this was and how I could begin to change. And really, it was through mindfulness, mindful eating, self-compassion, which I could do a whole episode on. Yesenia, would you mind also sharing your experience?
Yeah, of course. So for me, growing up in a Hispanic household, and you might relate to this, I know you mentioned something similar earlier, is that there were honestly so many instances of fat phobia in both my immediate family with like my mom and then extended family, right? And there's just this constant shaming of people, especially women who were in these larger bodies. So it was kind of always ingrained in my head that, oh, I'm supposed to look a certain way and I'm not supposed to look a certain way. And so it, come middle school, I have like access to social media, to other media. And so it's when I started seeing kind of a shift in how women were portrayed as well. And it's when I first heard the term like slim thick. So for me, it was just very confusing at the time because it was like, okay, so there's a new beauty standard now. And it was just very confusing at that time at, a young middle school age. And so it really stuck with me for a long time up until undergrad, where I kind of had to learn to uncondition these thoughts of how I'm supposed to look in similar ways of what you said, like the self-compassion. And so, yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Yesenia. What you said really highlights how confusing and exhausting it is that these beauty standards keep shifting. Like first it's thin, and then it's slim thick, and then each new ideal just reinforces the idea that our worth is tied to how closely we fit that moving target. It is so unfair and makes me angry. I want to turn the convo to a little more, you know, about how we can fix this, right? And how we can change some of these behaviors, or at least start to change. So, if you'll join me for this pivot, y'all are the experts. So, from your perspective as nutritionists, what do you wish you could go back and tell your younger selves about health and healthy eating and, knowing what you know today? Yvette?
Yeah, I would just tell myself that instead of focusing on restriction, try thinking about more what you can add to your meals. One thing that helps me is building meals with a balance of carbs, protein, and healthy fats so you actually feel satisfied afterwards. You'll find that focusing on what you can add to your plate, you'll feel less obsessed over what quote unquote shouldn't be there on your plate, and you'll feel more ease about what it is that you are eating. Also, paying attention to your body's hunger and fullness cues is such a game changer as well. Like eat when you're hungry, stop eating when you're full before you hit that I overdid it feeling. And if tuning in into those cues like feels tricky because maybe due to stress or past dieting or even certain health challenges, you're not alone on that. It does take time and practice to rebuild that trust with your body. So it's important to practice patience with yourself as well along the way.
Yes, focusing on what you can add instead of what you have to cut out feels so much lighter and more sustainable that way. And then listening to your body's hunger and fullness cues is so vital. It takes time, and that change is not going to happen overnight, but it's definitely a practice. I can say that from experience. Something that helps me is the Japanese saying hara hachi bu. It's a Japanese saying which means eating until one is 80% full rather than completely full. So that it kind of doesn't take you up to that mark. And that way you're not like feeling, tired or that, your body has to spend so much energy digesting after a meal. So hara hachibu, eating until you're 80% full. This for me was a very helpful practice, along with slowing down my chewing so that I could listen to my body's cues more, right? Up until that fullness cue. And then, of course, like you said, the hunger cue, when you're hungry, eat when you're hungry. So, Yesenia, I turn to you. What would you tell your younger self about healthy eating?
For me, I would say one thing I would tell myself is to make sure I'm still basically just make sure to still be eating the foods that you enjoy. Especially, I'd like to highlight like any cultural foods that are staples within your culture or just your home. I think it's important to make sure that we're still enjoying these foods because, as you mentioned earlier, food is much more than just what we're eating. It's also part of our identity and our cultures, and we should still be able to celebrate and enjoy those foods and those meals. It's so I think, and also too, it just kind of reminds me of how in Spain they have this term called sobremesa, which literally translates to over the table. So, but that's not the true meaning. It's mainly just the idea that like getting together with your friends and your family and enjoying the meals that you have and this and what's being served. Like that's truly like the important part. And so I guess what I aim to get at is that I really do think food brings us together and it's important for so many cultures, not just Latino and Hispanic. So I think it's okay to indulge and to savor these foods when we can. Yeah.
I love that sobremesa. It's so powerful. It's an important reminder that healthy eating doesn't just mean cutting out the foods that, you know, excuse me, healthy eating doesn't mean cutting out foods, and especially not the foods that connect us to our families. And what else besides our families, our traditions and our joy. All of these practices mentioned can help create so much more sustainability in our eating and approach to food. And at the end of the day, we need sustainability in our eating if we want to feel and continue feeling good. Thank you both for those thoughtful takeaways. This has been such a meaningful conversation. And I'm so glad you joined me for my very first episode. I'm going to give you all a round of applause.
Thanks for having me. It was such a fun conversation, and it's great to finally put it out there for everybody.
Yeah, thank you for having me here as well. So many great topics we went over today.
Yay, thank you both so much. And to our listeners, thank you. Thanks for joining us on our journey of reflection and healing. And if today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to check out the free mindfulness tools on my website, linked down below. And then also some mindful eating meditations and journaling prompts to support you on your healing journey. And if you feel ready for more personalized support, you can also book a discovery call to hopefully lead to health coaching sessions with me. Yeah, I'd love to give you a free discovery call. And remember, your relationship with food and your body is something you can heal and rewrite, one compassionate step at a time. This has been From Mess to Mindful, Healing How We Eat. We'll see you next time.